The process begins with this high-quality beef tallow. We hydrogenate it right here to create the incredibly moisturizing formula.
Have you ever heard this before? Dove soap is made from beef fat. It sounds shocking, almost unsettling. And the moment you hear it, a series of questions instantly appear in your mind. Is it true? Have I been using something derived from animals all this time without knowing? And if so, why does no one talk about it openly? Interestingly, this rumor is not new. It has circulated quietly for decades, passed from one person to another, whispered in conversations, resurfacing again and again on forums, social media posts, and late-night discussions about things brands don't want you to know. But where did it actually begin? And more importantly, why does it still exist today? To understand this, we need to go back in time. Long before brands like Dove became household names, soap was not a luxury product. It was a necessity, produced locally, often crudely, and almost always made from what people had available. And what was widely available? Animal fat, especially beef fat, also known as tallow. For centuries, tallow was the backbone of soap making. It created hard bars, produced stable lather, and cleaned effectively. In fact, if you had lived 100 years ago, chances are every bar of soap you touched came from animal fat. No one questioned it. No one debated ethics or ingredient transparency. Soap was soap. It cleaned. That was enough. So here's the first uncomfortable thought. If soap historically came from animal fat, then when modern brands emerged, did they really abandon that formula overnight? This is where suspicion starts to grow. Consumers today live in an age of ingredient lists, ethical labels, vegan claims, and environmental awareness. We expect clarity, we expect honesty. Yet when it comes to soap, many people realize something unsettling. They don't actually know what's inside that smooth white bar. And that uncertainty leaves space for rumors to thrive. When people say Dove is made from beef fat, they are often repeating a simplified version of a much more complex reality. The truth is not black or white. It sits somewhere in a gray zone between chemistry, industrial processing, and marketing language. And that gray zone is precisely where confusion feels uncomfortable and curiosity becomes irresistible. Think about it for a moment. Dove doesn't market itself as a vegan soap. It markets softness, moisture, care. Words that focus on feeling, not formula. And when a brand chooses emotion over explanation, what do people do? They start filling in the blanks themselves. But here's a question rarely asked out loud. If something works beautifully, feels gentle on your skin, and meets safety standards, do you really want to know where it comes from? Because once you start pulling on that thread, you may discover things that challenge your assumptions not just about Dove, but about the entire soap industry. The rumor survives not because people have proof, but because it feels plausible. It connects modern products to old industrial practices. It taps into a deep mistrust of large corporations. And most of all, it forces us to confront an uncomfortable idea that clean does not always mean simple, and gentle does not always mean pure. So at this point, we are left hanging between past and present, between traditional soap making and modern cosmetic science, between what we assume and what we can actually verify. And the question now is no longer just, is Dove made from beef fat? The real question becomes, what exactly is beef fat in the context of modern manufacturing? And does it still exist in the way we imagine it? Because once you understand what tallow really is and how it has evolved, you may start to see this rumor in a completely different light. And when that happens, will you still feel the same about the soap you use every day? When people hear the words beef fat, an image instantly forms in their minds. Thick, yellowish grease, something raw, something crude, something that clearly does not belong in a smooth white bar of soap you rub on your skin every morning. But here is the uncomfortable truth. That image is wrong, or at least deeply outdated. To understand why the rumor around Dove refuses to disappear, we need to confront a bigger misunderstanding. Most people have no idea what beef tallow actually means in modern industrial chemistry. Historically, beef tallow was exactly what you imagine: rendered animal fat, melted down, filtered, and combined with alkaline substances to create soap through a process called saponification. Simple, effective, and by today's standards, shockingly direct. But industries don't stay simple for long. As manufacturing evolved, tallow stopped being fat in the everyday sense. It became a raw material, broken down into its fundamental components, fatty acids. These fatty acids are the real workhorses of soap. They determine hardness, lather, cleansing power, and how a bar feels on your skin. Here's the key twist most people never consider. Fatty acids are chemically identical regardless of whether they come from animals or plants. Stearic acid is stearic acid. Palmitic acid is palmitic acid. Once separated, purified, and refined, their origin becomes invisible not just to consumers, but even to chemists, unless they trace the supply chain backwards. So now, ask yourself this. If an ingredient is no longer recognizably animal, no longer smells, looks, or behaves like fat, and no longer exists in its original form, is it still beef fat in the way people fear? This is where the conversation shifts from emotion to science, and where many people start feeling uneasy, because science doesn't care about narratives. It cares about function. In modern soap production, manufacturers don't dump chunks of tallow into vats. They work with industrial-grade fatty acid inputs, sourced globally, refined to meet cosmetic standards, and blended for consistency. These inputs may come from palm oil, coconut oil, synthetic processes, or yes, sometimes animal sources. But once processed, the distinction becomes philosophical rather than physical. And that raises a disturbing question. If you cannot tell the difference, should you care about the origin or only the result? This is precisely why the word tallow feels misleading today. It drags our imagination backward, anchoring us in an era of slaughterhouses and open fires, while modern production takes place in sterile facilities filled with stainless steel, sensors, and chemical controls. Yet the rumor survives, because people don't argue with chemistry, they argue with imagery. And beef fat imagery is powerful. It collides directly with modern values: cleanliness, softness, purity, and ethical consumption. When someone hears beef fat soap, they're not reacting to a molecule, they're reacting to a story they tell themselves. But here's where things get even more interesting. Even when brands move away from animal-derived sources, they rarely shout it from the rooftops. Why? Because transparency can create new problems. The more details you give, the more questions you invite. And questions don't always lead to trust. They often lead to fear. So instead of talking about origins, brands talk about outcomes. Moisturizing, gentle, dermatologist tested. And that silence? It leaves room for rumors to grow. Which brings us to a critical turning point in this story. Because if beef tallow today is no longer what it used to be, and if fatty acids are interchangeable at a chemical level, then the real issue is no longer what soap used to be made from. The real issue becomes, how much do modern brands actually tell us, and how much do we really want to know? In the next segment, we're going to step inside the modern factory. Not the imagined one filled with vats of animal fat, but the real one. The one governed by global supply chains, regulatory standards, and quiet compromises that never make it onto the packaging. And once you see how soap is truly made today, you may realize the question was never about beef fat at all. When most people imagine a soap factory, their minds drift backward in time. Huge vats, thick mixtures, bubbling slowly. Something handmade, almost primitive. And somewhere in that imagined scene, animal fat being melted down. But the reality inside a modern Dove production facility is far less dramatic and far more calculated. Step inside, and the first thing you notice is not smell, or steam, or chaos. It's silence, cleanliness, precision, stainless steel surfaces, digital control panels. Everything is measured, monitored, and documented. This is not a place where tradition rules. This is a place where consistency does. Modern soap production is less about making soap and more about engineering a sensory experience. Texture, hardness, dissolution rate, foam structure, skin feel. Each parameter is carefully designed long before any physical ingredient enters the building. And here's the first reality check. Soap today is not built from ingredients. It's built from specifications. Manufacturers don't ask, should we use animal fat or plant oil? They ask, what fatty acid profile delivers the result we want? Once that profile is defined, sourcing becomes a logistical question not a moral one. Suppliers around the world provide refined fatty acids that meet strict cosmetic-grade standards. These materials arrive already processed, already purified, already standardized. No origin story attached, just numbers, tolerances, and certifications. This is where many people feel uncomfortable, because the factory doesn't care about rumors.
All right, the door is open.
It cares about performance. Every batch is tested, pH levels checked, moisturizing properties evaluated, stability confirmed. If something doesn't meet the required criteria, it doesn't move forward. Whether an input originated from palm oil, coconut oil, or an animal-derived source is secondary to whether it behaves exactly as designed. And now comes the question no one likes to ask out loud. If a product is safe, regulated, consistent, and performs exactly as promised, does the backstory still matter? The answer depends on who you are. For regulators, what matters is compliance. For engineers, what matters is repeatability. For marketers, what matters is perception. And for consumers, what matters is trust. This is where global corporations like Unilever, the parent company behind Dove, walk a careful line. They operate across dozens of countries, each with different laws, cultural expectations, and ethical standards. A formula that works in one market may need adjustment in another. Ingredient sourcing may shift depending on availability, sustainability goals, or cost pressures. So the idea of one single Dove soap formula is, in itself, a myth. What you hold in your hand is the result of a global optimization process, not a fixed recipe passed down through time.
Watch your
and
back.
this is where
Coming through with the pallet,
transparency
Jack.
becomes complicated.
Clear on the left?
Because the
We need
more
these
complex
bars
the
stocked
system,
by noon.
the harder it is to explain simply. Ingredient lists show chemical names, not stories. Certifications cover safety, not philosophy. And the factory itself remains invisible because most people don't actually want to see it. They want reassurance, not reality, which explains something fascinating. The rumor about beef fat doesn't survive because of evidence. It survives because it fills a storytelling gap. It gives people a concrete image to react to, something tangible, something emotional. In contrast, industrially refined fatty acids, optimized for dermatological performance, doesn't spark outrage. It sparks boredom, and boredom doesn't travel far. But let's pause here and ask a deeper question. If modern soap production is so controlled, so regulated, so far removed from raw materials, at what point does an ingredient stop being what it came from? Is identity preserved through origin or erased through processing? Because once you accept that today's soap is the result of layered transformations, chemical, logistical, and regulatory, the original accusation starts to feel strangely outdated. Maybe the factory isn't hiding something sinister. Maybe it's hiding something far more unsettling, that the products we use every day are no longer made, they are designed. And design doesn't care about nostalgia.
Hi there, did you find
In the next
everything
segment,
okay today?
we'll confront the real
a lot of
reason this
soap.
conversation keeps resurfacing. Not chemistry, not factories, but something far more fragile, consumer belief. Because when belief cracks, even the cleanest soap can start to feel dirty. At this point, the question is no longer about chemistry. It's no longer about factories, fatty acids, or whether beef tallow still exists in its original form. So why does the doubt around Dove keep coming back? The answer lies somewhere far less technical and far more human. Dove is not just a soap brand, it is an idea, a promise. For years, Dove has positioned itself as gentle, caring, and emotionally aware. It doesn't sell cleaning power. It sells softness, self-acceptance, and trust. And when a brand builds its identity on values rather than function, it also becomes far more vulnerable, because values invite scrutiny. Every campaign, every slogan, every unspoken implication creates expectations. And once consumers internalize those expectations, they start asking deeper questions. Is the brand really what it claims to be? Or is this just another carefully designed story? This is where rumors find fertile ground. The idea that Dove might be linked, however, indirectly to animal-derived ingredients feels like a betrayal to some consumers. Not because it's unsafe, not because it's illegal, but because it clashes with an emotional narrative people thought they understood. And when emotion enters the picture, logic often steps aside. Social media accelerates this process. A single post can turn speculation into common knowledge overnight. Context disappears. Nuance gets flattened. The phrase, "made from beef fat," spreads faster than any explanation about industrial processing ever could. Why? Because outrage is easier to share than understanding. There's also another layer to this discomfort, one people rarely acknowledge.
Yes, I think
Many
everything
consumers
is
want
finally
ethical
ready.
clarity, but not ethical complexity.
at
They
this
want simple
one.
labels, good or bad,
Wow,
clean
it's
or
so
dirty,
colorful.
ethical or unethical. But modern manufacturing refuses to be that simple. Global supply chains blur responsibility. Ingredients pass through dozens of hands, countries, and transformations before they reach the final product. And somewhere along that journey, moral certainty starts to dissolve. So when people latch onto the beef fat rumor, they're not really talking about soap. They're asking something much bigger. Can I trust this system at all? And that's a dangerous question for any brand. Because once trust becomes shaky, even silence becomes suspicious. If Dove explains too much, people wonder what it's trying to justify. If it explains too little, people assume something is being hidden. There is no perfect response, only trade-offs. This is the paradox of modern branding. The more emotionally connected a brand becomes, the more fragile that connection is. One crack in the narrative, and everything gets re-examined under a harsher light. But here's the twist most discussions miss. What if the real problem isn't that Dove might or might not use animal-derived